Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Trump envoy to join Gaza ceasefire talks. So President-elect Donald Trump's incoming Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, said Tuesday that he was traveling to Qatar to take part in Gaza hostage and ceasefire negotiations with Biden administration officials. So I still think, the chances of a deal still seem very slim. You have Netanyahu saying that he has no intention of actually ending the genocidal war in Gaza. And what Hamas is saying publicly is that any deal must include a permanent ceasefire and a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces. They want a permanent end to this thing, and that's clearly not what Netanyahu or the Israeli government have in mind. But I thought this story was interesting that they have a Trump official, from the incoming administration taking part in talks, and he is insisting that progress is being made. He said, quote, "We're making a lot of progress, and I don't want to say too much because I think they're doing a really good job back in Doha," end quote. He said that he was, quote, "really hopeful that by the inaugural we'll have some good things to announce on behalf of the president," end quote. So the inauguration is coming up very soon, January 20th. So I thought this was interesting. He was asked what has been impeding a deal. Basically, why hasn't there been a deal yet? How come these talks haven't moved along further? And he declined to answer that, saying, quote, "I believe we've been on the verge of a deal. I don't want to discuss what's delayed it. No point to be negative in any way," end quote. So Witkoff, I don't really know anything about him. He's a real estate guy. He's a real estate investor. This is who Trump appointed to be his Middle East envoy. Again, I just really don't know what to expect from this guy. But I just think it's interesting because what do we see from the Biden officials? They're just constantly blaming Hamas, when they're involved in these negotiations. And he kind of declined to do that and, didn't want to say anything negative because it might impede the negotiations. And that's kind of been Netanyahu's whole strategy in previous rounds of negotiations was to say, put as much stuff out publicly that could impede the negotiations. But again, I still don't have, expectations here of a deal happening. But let's hope something unexpected happens and this horrific violence in Gaza ends. Trump was not so diplomatic when he was at this press conference with Witkoff. We have another story about some things that Trump said during this press conference that we'll get into later on. But when it came to this, Witkoff sounded very diplomatic. Trump did not. He repeated his threat that there would be all hell to pay if Hamas did not start releasing hostages by his inauguration. He said, quote, "If those hostages aren't back, if they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. I don't have to say any more, but that's what it is, and they should have been back a long time ago," end quote. As I covered yesterday, Trump has vowed to be a staunch supporter of Israel, as he was in his previous administration, saying that he was the best friend that Israel ever had. So according to media reports, Hamas has released a list of 34 hostages it is willing to release as part of its first phase of a ceasefire deal in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners. So the Times of Israel reported that a potential deal that's on the table would only involve a 6 to 7 week temporary ceasefire, and relatives of Israelis still held in Gaza are calling for the government to pursue a comprehensive deal that releases all the hostages. And of course, Netanyahu and his government don't want to do that. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strikes in Gaza kill dozens of more Palestinians. The violence, the daily slaughter continues. Gaza's health ministry said Tuesday that Israeli attacks killed at least 31 Palestinians and wounded 57 over the previous 24-hour period. And as we always mention, the health ministry's figures, they only account for dead and wounded Palestinians brought to hospitals. They said there's still a number of victims under the rubble or in areas that rescuers cannot reach. Later in the day, I added an update, medical sources. So Gaza's health ministry, they put out the death toll around midday Gaza time, like noon in Gaza, and it's for the previous 24 hours. Later on Thursday, it was about, I think probably around midnight on Thursday, or it was very early Friday morning, Al Jazeera reported that medical sources in Gaza said at least 49 Palestinians were killed since dawn on Thursday. And that included 5 children who were killed in the so-called Al-Mawasi safe zone. This is a tent camp that Israel's declared a humanitarian zone, but they've continued to bomb it. It's come under constant attack. This picture here is from central Gaza. Palestinians mourning the dead in central Gaza. So the health ministry warned in another post about the dire situation that Gaza's hospitals are facing due to shortages and looting of fuel and aid deliveries. The post warned, quote, hospitals do not have any fuel stock due to the occupation's policy of rationing fuel since the beginning of the war on Gaza, end quote. The ministry said that the Israeli military was forcing aid convoys, including fuel trucks, to take roads filled with thieves and bandits to steal the aid under Israeli protection. And the Israeli newspaper Haaretz previously reported that the IDF was allowing armed gangs to loot aid convoys. So Israeli attacks on Tuesday and other Israeli attacks included heavy strikes on Gaza City. So the north has come under very heavy attack. At least 8 were killed by Israeli shelling and drone fire in areas east of Gaza City. And Al Jazeera reported a strike on a home in Gaza City, but the number of casualties was unclear as bodies remained under the rubble. Some strikes in central Gaza targeting the Barej and Nusret refugee camp. So, again, just this daily, what else is there to say? It's just every day, dozens of Palestinians getting killed by Israel with weapons supplied by the U.S. All right, so the next one here, IDF shot dead a Palestinian that it was using as a human shield. So an Israeli military officer accidentally shot and killed a Palestinian who was being used by IDF troops as a human shield, and this was reported by a Hebrew language magazine on Tuesday. So using Palestinians as human shields to search buildings and tunnels that may be booby-trapped or contain hiding Hamas militants has become a common practice of the Israeli military. The report said that the incident occurred in August 2024 when the IDF's Nahal Brigade's 931st Battalion was in the southern city of Rafah. The Palestinian being used as a human shield was in a building that a commander from the battalion entered, and according to the report, the commander did not know the Palestinian was being used by the battalion and opened fire, killing him. An IDF spokesman confirmed the incident to the magazine, claiming that the case was being investigated by the brigade commander. The Israeli military, they said that it was investigated and that the lessons of the investigation have been implemented. They're saying, don't worry, we took care of it. But the Israeli military, they've used Palestinian civilians that they've found and held them without any sort of charge to serve as human shields, including minors, including kids under 18 years old. Mohammed Shubair, a 17-year-old Palestinian, told the New York Times that he was used by the IDF as a human shield in his hometown, Khan Yunis, where he was found hiding with his family. Shubair said he was forced to walk through the ruins and enter buildings in handcuffs. In one instance, he did find explosives in a building. He said, quote, "The soldiers sent me like a dog to a booby-trapped apartment. I thought these would be the last moments of my life," end quote. So literal human shields, putting civilians in front of you so you don't get hurt, so they get hurt instead of you. That's a literal human shield. Of course, Israel and the U.S. are always accusing Hamas of using human shields. The accusation is that they fire rockets from civilian areas, which is kind of the nature of guerrilla warfare. But what this is literal human shield, like putting a human in front of you so you don't get shot. So when it comes to the Israeli military, it really does seem like every accusation is a confession. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. claims Israel will still withdraw from Lebanon. So this article is from Jason Ditz. U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein is trying to reassure Lebanon and the rest of the world that Israeli troops will withdraw from southern Lebanon despite repeated media reports that Israel is planning to announce they're going to remain. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said that Israel might scrap the ceasefire entirely. The Israel-Lebanon ceasefire stipulated Israel withdraw from Lebanon within 60 days. We're now 42 days into the ceasefire, and Israel just started to leave a second town, Naqoura. So far, Israel has only pulled out of one other town. And the thing is that they've taken 2 other towns. So they leave a town, take a town, I guess, is what they're doing here. But so it's just not a good sign. Again, this ceasefire is supposed to, the 60 days is coming up soon. And reporters from LBC International entered Naqoura after the announced withdrawal, and they documented widespread destruction inside the town. And we've seen Israeli military bulldozers demolishing civilian homes and other infrastructure in these Israeli-occupied areas in Lebanon. So Hochstein's assurance that Israel will leave Lebanon conspicuously fails to mention a departure date. He didn't say explicitly that they're going to be gone within this 60-day period. He just said, don't worry, they're going to leave. Don't worry about it. And it goes to show, the U.S. is a supposed, they try to act like there's some neutral broker here between the two sides, that they're supposed to make sure the ceasefire is being enforced, but they gave Israel assurances that they could, basically do whatever they want. And we've seen Israel, that they would have freedom of action in southern Lebanon. And we've seen them bomb southern Lebanon, demolish buildings, shoot people, kill over 30 people so far. So we'll see if they actually withdraw. All right. And Hochstein, it's worth mentioning that he is a veteran of the IDF. He's Israeli born and he's an IDF veteran. And he's working for the U.S. He's lived in the U.S. for a while, but it's just, I think, important context. All right. So the next one here, Israel's Smotrich calls for major destruction in the West Bank. So on Monday, Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich called for massive destruction in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, saying that several cities should look like Gaza's Jabalia. He wrote on X, quote, Funduk, Nablus, and Jenin must look like Jabalia, end quote. And, referring to Jabalia there in the north, the Jabalia refugee camp has been basically completely destroyed as part of this ethnic cleansing campaign in northern Gaza. And his call for escalation in the West Bank came after a shooting attack killed 3 Israeli settlers, including 2 women, near an illegal settlement. He said, quote, the terrorism in Judea and Samaria and the terrorism from Gaza and Iran is the same terrorism, and it must be defeated. Those who trust the Palestinian Authority to maintain the security of Israeli citizens wake up to a morning when terrorists are again slaughtering Jewish residents, end quote. So Smotrich said the Palestinian West Bank cities need to look like Jabalia. So this is what he said. He said they need to look like Gaza, these cities that have been destroyed, so that Kfar Saba does not become Kfar Aza. And he's referring to a central Israel town near the West Bank and a Gaza border town that was hit by Hamas on October 7th. So what's funny here is basically he's saying that they need to take this action in the West Bank so a Israeli town near the West Bank doesn't come under attack. And there was a community note added to his post on X that pointed out Smotrich was a big believer in this idea that Hamas was an asset of Israel in Gaza, and he really laid it out. And, he essentially favored the strategy of helping prop up Hamas to keep the Palestinians divided so that there wouldn't be a Palestinian state. And then, you look how that backfired on Israel, on Netanyahu. So I just thought it was an interesting community note, and it referred to him. I mean, he spelled it out very explicitly. I'll read his quote. This is something he said in 2015. He said, quote, the PA is a liability and Hamas is an asset. On the international playing field in this game of delegitimization, think about for a second the PA is a liability and Hamas is an asset. It's a terrorist organization. Nobody will recognize it. Nobody will give it status at the ICC, and nobody will let them push resolutions at the UN, causing us to need an American veto, end quote. So there you go. And, I say his support or his strategy there backfired on Israel. But really, I mean, guys like Smotrich, even, Netanyahu, this seems to be just what they wanted, an excuse to completely destroy Gaza, ramp things up in the West Bank, war in Lebanon. He's all about everything that's happening right now. And October 7th, of course, was the pretext to do all this. All right, so the next one here, Biden rushes substantial Ukraine arms transfers. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So before President Joe Biden exits the White House later this month, he is planning a massive final aid package for Ukraine. The Pentagon will attempt to rush the weapons to Kiev before President-elect Donald Trump takes office. 2 defense officials said the new package would be announced on Thursday during a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group at an American military base in Germany, the Associated Press reported. The source added that the weapons will come directly from U.S. military stockpiles and will be fast-tracked to Ukraine before Trump's second term begins in less than 2 weeks. So they're really going to rush this. The rush to provide Kiev with a substantial arms shipment before Trump returns to power appears aimed at undermining the president-elect's stated goal of bringing the war in Ukraine to an end. Since the American people voted for Trump to be the next president, the current administration has significantly escalated support for Kiev, allowing Ukrainian forces to use long-range American missiles. In Russia, there's all sorts of escalations, the anti-personnel mines, just trying to dump as many weapons in. So we don't know exactly how big this final package is going to be, but it sounds like they're going to announce it on Thursday. Lloyd Austin's going to his final meeting of what they call this Ukraine Defense Contact Group. They hold these meetings in Germany. All right, so the next one here, Ukrainian troops training in France go AWOL. This is another one from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. He's got our Ukraine stuff covered today. Dozens of Ukrainian soldiers stationed in France for training have reportedly fled their military bases. The apparent desertions come as Kiev faces similar problems at home, where a growing number of troops are abandoning their frontline positions. According to Newsweek, dozens of Ukrainian troops undergoing military training in France have deserted. An unnamed French military official downplayed the numbers of soldiers walking off base as marginal and noted that desertion is not a crime in France. The troops belonged to Ukraine's 155th Anne of Kiev Mechanized Brigade, dubbed as a flagship project of the French military, which has also supplied arms to the unit. Of the brigade's 5,800 soldiers, around 2,300 were trained on French soil. Most of its members are conscripts with no experience, so a lot of them decided to leave. An investigation by Ukrainian journalist Yuri Butasov found that 1,700 soldiers had deserted the brigade before entering combat, and that at least 50 had left while training in France. 1,700 soldiers. I mean, that's huge. 1,700 out of 5,800. He argued that the desertions reflected poor management by military officials, saying that they continue to waste lives and state funds on new projects instead of strengthening experienced and combat-ready brigades. And desertions have really spiked this past year. But man, that's a lot. All right, so the next one here, 280 dead in clashes in Syria between the SDF and the SNA. So this is another one from Jason. While much of the fighting between the Turkey-backed and Syrian National Army and the U.S.-backed Kurdish SDF has centered on the cities of Manbij and Kobani, the largest focus in recent days has been the Tishreen Dam, a major hydroelectric dam on the Euphrates River. This is what they're really fighting over. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, some 280 people have been killed so far in the battle over the dam. So that's huge. The split is 199 SNA fighters, so those are the Turkey-backed fighters, 56 SDF fighters, and 25 civilians, including 5 women and 2 children. Together with the Takba Dam further east down the Euphrates, Tishreen Dam provides approximately 90% of northeastern Syria's electricity. Concerns are growing that Turkey is taking more and more water share on the river, while the river's water level has been low in recent years. The SDF has bragged it foiled attacks on Metro Manbij and the Tishrin Dam, reporting the SNA attacks were backed by both Turkish artillery and air support. There have been multiple reports of Turkish drone strikes around the area and in recent days. So the Kurdish kind of authority, the government in the area, expressed concern about the continued attacks on Tishrin Dam, warning the dam has yet to be restored to full normal operation. So again, this is very heavy fighting going on here in the north, and the U.S. is reportedly building some kind of new base in this area. Just a big mess that the U.S. is involved in because the SDF is its allies in Syria. All right, so the next one here, and they're fighting against, Turkey is a NATO ally. Obviously, Turkey's kind of does their own thing compared to most NATO countries. But the U.S. has nukes, has nuclear weapons in Turkey. It's just, you think about it. It's a U.S. ally that has U.S. nukes on its soil fighting another U.S. ally where that has U.S. troops, kind of stationed with them. Again, just a complete mess. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. accuses the RSF of committing genocide in Sudan. So on Tuesday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken accused the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, of committing genocide in Sudan's civil war and announced sanctions on RSF's leader, Mohammed Hamdan Daglo Musa, known as Hemeti. Since war broke out between Hemeti's RSF and the Sudanese armed forces, led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan in April 2023, at least tens of thousands have been killed. Some estimates put it over 100,000. And millions are facing acute food shortages, with an estimated 638,000 already facing famine. So a horrific humanitarian situation in Sudan, a horrific war. Atrocities have been committed by both sides. And Blinken said that he previously determined both the RSF and the SAF had committed war crimes. The RSF and allied militias have also been accused of carrying out massacres of civilians. So Blinken said, quote, the RSF and allied militias have systematically murdered men and boys, even infants, on an ethnic basis, and deliberately targeted women and girls from certain ethnic groups for rape and other forms of brutal sexual violence, end quote. He said the U.S. was targeting Hemeti with sanctions for his role in systematic atrocities, and that he was sanctioning 7 RSF-owned companies located in the UAE. The UAE has been covertly shipping weapons to the RSF. Everybody is aware of that, but that has not stopped the Biden administration from pushing forward major arms sales to the UAE. They're still selling weapons to the UAE. And now they're accusing the group that the UAE is arming of committing genocide. And of course, the hypocrisy here, Blinken's declaration that the RSF is committing genocide comes as he and other Biden administration officials are vehemently denying that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, despite that becoming the consensus of leading human rights organizations. And look at that thing, what Blinken's examples of why this is a genocide. Those are all things that the Israeli military has done. We mentioned killing infants. I mean, how many infants have been killed in Gaza? The official list this is from September. The official list of confirmed deaths was 710 infants. 710 infants under the age of 1. That's confirmed, a low number in September, which has, of course, risen since then. So this is what Blinken is also supporting. And, this is like a last minute thing. This is some kind of thing, I think, to declare that this is a genocide in Sudan makes him, feel like he's doing some big noble thing while he's, enabling, supporting, excusing, denying a genocide in Gaza. So again, the situation in Sudan is absolutely horrific. It's something I really do need to follow more often. I focus on conflicts that our government is involved in, and the U.S. is involved in some ways in Sudan, but nothing like in Gaza and Ukraine and everything. But I certainly should put more focus. We always run stories in the lower parts of the page about Sudan, but I should do some more coverage of it because, again, it is just such a horrific war. And now this seems, this is the Biden administration going out, but this kind of makes it seem like now the U.S. is taking more of a side, is taking the Sudanese army's side here. if they're accusing just the RSF of committing genocide. Not sure how the Trump administration is if they're gonna change anything related to that genocide declaration. All right, so the next one here, Tracker cracks open DC's think tank funding. So this article is from Responsible Statecraft by Kelly Vlahos. This is a cool thing that they published. It's basically a think tank funding tracker built by the Democratizing Foreign Policy Program at the Quincy Institute. And you can go to the site and search all these think tanks and their donors. So it's really useful. I'm definitely going to get use out of it, because one thing that's always good to look up, especially when a new administration is forming, you kind of look at the lower level people and you say, okay, a lot of them come from think tanks. And then you say, all right, what think tank did they come from? What is the think tank like? Where do they get their funding? And you kind of get an idea of the picture of, their history. So it's definitely a useful tool for the work we do at antiwar.com and other, for other researchers and journalists and stuff. So definitely go check that out. All right, so the last story here, Trump will not rule out force to take the Panama Canal and Greenland. So for weeks now, Trump's been talking about taking the Panama Canal, taking Greenland, and it's something I kind of at first just kind of dismissed and was like, he's just talking, whatever. But now he won't drop it. And this is the incoming president of the United States, so I really do need to cover this. And he really seems to be serious about it now, because he gave this press conference on Tuesday, the same one that Witkoff is at Mar-a-Lago, and he made a huge focus, because he kind of had these opening remarks, and it was a huge focus on the Panama Canal, Greenland, and Canada. He wants to make Canada a 51st state. Again, these are things you see, you kind of laugh off, but then it's like, wait, he actually is coming. He's going to be the president, so is he serious about these things? And it seems like he is. So at a press conference on Tuesday, Trump repeated his calls for the U.S. to take the Panama Canal and Greenland and said he wouldn't rule out the idea of military force. When asked if he would avoid using economic and military coercion, Trump said, quote, "I can't assure you. You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two," end quote. So saying, I can't assure that I won't use military force here. Trump claims that the Panama Canal is controlled by China, but it is under the control of the Panama Canal Authority, which is a government agency of Panama. Trump said, quote, "Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China, and we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China," end quote. The president-elect has even alleged that Chinese soldiers are in the Panama Canal. So he wrote this on Christmas Day on Truth Social. He said, quote, "Christmas greetings to all, including the wonderful soldiers of China who are lovingly but illegally operating the Panama Canal," end quote. And so Panama's president, Jose Raul Mulino, called Trump's claims nonsense and said the canal was under the full control of Panama. He said, quote, "There are no Chinese soldiers in the canal. You are free. The whole world is free to visit the canal if you please. What Trump has said on this issue is nonsense. It does not exist," end quote. So at the press conference, Trump criticized the deal that Jimmy Carter signed that handed the Panama Canal to Panama in 1999. And he also said that the fees for U.S. ships to use the canal were too high. And he also, going over to Greenland, he cited China to explain why he wanted to take Greenland, which is an autonomous territory of Denmark. He said that Denmark should give up Greenland for the free world. And I don't really understand the idea here, because, well, let me read what he said. I guess he views it as some kind of strategic location to counter China and Russia. He said, quote, "They should give it up because we need it for national security. You have Chinese ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen," end quote. So the thing about Greenland is that it's a member of NATO. It was actually a founding member of NATO. And there's a U.S. military base there. So, I mean, you could theoretically just expand the military presence there if you wanted to. Not that I think the U.S. should do that, but the whole thing is just strange. And he's also calling for the U.S. to absorb Canada as a 51st state. He said he wouldn't use military force for that, but he said that he could use economic force. He said, quote, because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security, end quote. He was saying how the U.S. pays a lot to help defend Canada. So anyway, he also says he's going to impose substantial tariffs on goods coming from Canada and Mexico due to trade deficits, illegal immigration, and drugs coming through the borders. He also outlined a plan to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. So he's got some expansionist designs on the Western Hemisphere. The question, will he really try to advance these things? I don't know. We'll see. Another thing I'm worried about is kind of the potential for military action against the cartels in Mexico. You see him talk about that. A lot of Republicans talk about that. The whole thing is just kind of crazy. The U.S. has invaded Panama before. What was that? Back in 1989 when they took out Noriega, who was a CIA asset before. But anyway, so that's the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints. One from Ron Paul: the Doge should end the Global Engagement Center. One from Matt Taibbi: why is Russiagate's origin story redacted? One from Ramsey Baroud: fighting Israel's war in Jenin, can the Palestinian Authority be saved? One from Brandon Buck: invading Mexico will not solve the cartel problem. That's at the American Conservative. Go check that out. It makes a very good argument explaining why invading Mexico is not going to solve the problem. The cartels are not some small bands. It's not, they control a lot of territory. They have heavy weapons. They have a lot of influence. It's not like it would be some easy thing. Like you see some Republicans say, oh, you send our special forces in there, they'll take care of it. But no, it'll be like Afghanistan. Maybe even harder than that. So the spotlight is from Connor Freeman: Israel's newfound freedom of action portends regional war. So please go check all that stuff out. You could always support this show by sharing, liking, subscribing, commenting. Follow us on social media: Instagram, Twitter, TikTok now. Antiwar.com has a TikTok account. That is it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.